I think I finally recognized some homophobic tendencies that I had in my life that I was unaware were there.
And somehow the conversation of boys painting their fingernails came up. And I was like, yeah, no, we don't do that here. And they were like,
I've been called homophobic before because I do not affirm. That was wild to me as someone who gets comments and DMs consistently saying your marriage is doomed to fail. So I'm going, this is a gathering of people who struggle with the same things. Is it safe? To be candid, is it safe to say like, hey, all go stay in the same hotel, the same Airbnb?
oh, wow. There's a bunch of folks here dealing with the same thing and we're all at the same hotel. Is this wise? Do you feel like that was homophobic?
Ruslan.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, back for the second time. A friend of mine, she's amazing. She was here just a few months ago, and I'm excited to have her back because there were some things that perhaps we were unclear about, or perhaps Zach's thumbnail and title of the video wasn't clear about. Brenna, thank you for being back.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm super excited.
Yeah, it was fun reading through all the different comments.
Shout out to you for reading the comments.
It was some days it was fun, some days it was like, do I need to be on blood pressure medication? I don't know. It was a great practice in empathy.
Okay.
I think.
I don't read comments.
Okay.
I read the comments when they first come out. When a video first comes out, I'll go just kind of check the temperature, and then it usually goes off the rails. Because the further it goes beyond your people, it gets weird.
It does get weird.
It gets weird.
Got some weird comments.
Yeah. So our last conversation, there was some confusion on the idea of the label gay Christian. I went back and added timestamps to everything so people weren't confused. This is what Brenna believes. This is why she doesn't like the label and doesn't use the label. But here's why we aren't marking and avoiding people who may hold to that label. And some people still didn't quite understand. But I wanted to kind of get your perspective in what areas you feel like maybe we needed to clarify.
Yeah.
And specifically the title of gay Christian versus same-sex attracted Christian versus just freedom language, which I just learned that phrase for the first time today.
Yeah. So I was reading through the comments and just trying to get a sense of, okay, where are people getting hung up on? And do we apply that frame of thinking in different areas? And so a lot of people would say you can't, a lot of the LGBTQ community identity language is pinned on something that we as Christians would label as sin.
Okay.
And so to use that language would be, it's not freedom language.
Okay.
Right? It's not.
And freedom language means I'm free from
I'm free
this.
in Christ.
I'm free in Christ.
I'm just a Christian.
Yep.
And nothing else. And so I was reading through those and I'm going, okay, but so let's start with orphan ministry. Like, do we say to people who do orphan ministry, well, but there aren't orphans in Jesus. We are all adopted. We are all sons and daughters. Therefore, you shouldn't call it orphan ministry. But that's kind of, it might be too nuanced because while orphans are a product of sin, they're also a product of brokenness. So like let's look at a more like sin specific label. Prison ministry. Are the Christians who are saying to gay Christians, you can't call yourself a gay Christian, are they also going to the prison ministries and saying, stop calling yourself prison ministry? Well, prisoners are free in Christ. When they choose to believe in Jesus, they're free in Christ. But prisoner describes their current reality. And so if we're thinking through LGBTQ language, are we trying to like pigeonhole it into meaning just one thing? But that's like a cultural context of our modern day. So my response is always, is there a biblical framework we can work through? Because it doesn't really matter. Our current day culture, like it matters, but it's not as important as the word of God, right? Like that's our authority. So I was thinking through what biblical narratives do I know? And I just was reminded by the Holy Spirit of the Samaritan woman. And the first thing that stands out to me is that she's never named. Like, Jesus never names her. We are given her story in the biblical canon, and we know her as either the woman at the well or the Samaritan woman. That's really significant to me. So thinking through, okay, what is Samaritan? Do you know, like, what the main problem was that Jewish people had with Samaritans?
So the Samaritans were like a half-breed. They were half Jewish, and then they also had obviously hostility with the folks that were there. And I was just reading Acts, and I see that the ministry ends up making it back to Samaria, and it's like massive revival there. So from my understanding is like they kind of deviated from the Jewish folks, and they were kind of cousins, but not cousins. And there's a lot of tension on where they could worship and where they couldn't worship in the temple versus the mountain, all that sort of stuff.
Do you know in what way did they deviate from?
I don't remember which way they deviated.
Okay, so they intermarried.
With who?
So when
with
God said,
non-Jewish
do not intermarry.
Okay.
So it was literally sexual sin.
Okay. Interesting.
Right? So their entire identity.
And he called his 10 servants and delivered to them 10 pounds and said unto them, occupy till I come. The Occupy Till I Come collection is here at the Bless God Shop, a collaboration we did with our friend Josh Nadeau from Sword and Pencil. This piece of art is made up of beautiful iconography, telling the story of sowing and reaping, dying to sin, and evangelizing the lost. In this collection, you will find these designs highlighted, such as this Death to Sin t-shirt, which highlights the bold design of hammering a nail through Satan's skull. And on the back, a large print that says discipline is freedom. Now you can find all the regular stuff like high quality printed shirts and Champs printed hoodies, but this time around, we also decided to do some women's cut t-shirts as well. And for the first time ever, you can also pick up a beautiful canvas print of the Occupy Till I Come design or the Discipline is Freedom piece. And we also, for the first time ever, got an amazing 500-piece puzzle, which I personally enjoyed getting to sit down, do with my own family, and it sparked some really interesting conversations. And when you put on one of the pieces from this collection, it's a constant reminder that we are here to not just sit back and be apathetic, but to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to help usher in God's kingdom on this side of eternity and to care for the least of these. But this entire collection is only available until September 8th at midnight. So go to blessgod.shop and get yours now.
That reminds me of what the modern day church thinks of when they think of LGBTQ community, right? It's sexual sin. So she comes and she finds Jesus, and he has a conversation with her, and he chooses not to name her. And I just love when the disciples show up and it says like they marveled that he was talking with a woman, which is like a totally different thing. But then he doesn't send her to the Sadducees. He doesn't send her to the Pharisees. He sends her back to the Samaritan people. And uses her identity as a Samaritan to be a familiar witness in a place that would accept her but wouldn't accept other people who knew Jesus. And that's really curious to me because I had this experience recently where I got invited to speak at a conference, and the conference specifically was for LGBTQ and same-sex attracted Christians who hold to a traditional sexual ethic. So these are people who would say, I'm attracted to the same sex, or I wrestle with gender dysphoria, but I believe that God has outlined what Christians are supposed to do in the Bible.
Yeah, they're holding to a regular sex ethic, a Christian sex ethic.
And so this conference is for those people and for people who love and support them. So I got invited to speak there. And before I went, I think I was a little bit nervous just because I've been wrestling with how much do we identify with with our sin struggles and our temptations.
You were thinking about this for yourself. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And there, you know, throughout my past of being publicly out, sharing that I wrestle with same-sex attraction, I've been invited to groups, like support groups of people who wrestle with the same thing. And my conviction has always been, in a short word, we don't hold AA meetings in a bar for a reason. So I'm not going to go bond with people who struggle in the same way that I do in this specific place. So when I thought about this conference, that was kind of one of the first things that came to mind was like, oh, is this good stewardship?
Okay, so you said we don't hold AA meetings in a bar, and help me because I'm not tracking all the way. How does that connect to the conference?
So I'm going, this is a gathering of people who struggle with the same things. Is it safe? Like, is it, to be candid, is it safe to say like, hey, all go stay in the same hotel, the same Airbnb?
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, these are the thoughts that I had prior to being invited, just knowing that the conference existed, asking myself. And I want to say, I want to make it very clear that that was a personal conviction. That's not necessary. And it's a conviction that I am thinking, like, do other people wrestle with this, or at least recognize that it could be a stumbling block for certain people? So I got asked to speak, and they were very, very kind in asking if I would meet with them before I signed my contract to say, if you choose to speak here, there are going to be a lot of people who don't like you or who won't trust you anymore. And, you know, I think I've already put my stake in the ground with what I believe when it comes to temptation and identity language. But there were some things I was wrestling with. And when I went, I was deeply convicted by a few different things. The first thing that I was deeply convicted by was, I think I finally recognized some homophobic tendencies that I had in my life that I was unaware were there.
Okay.
Which is interesting because it's still something that I wrestle with, right? Because I would say if my boys looked at me and were like, Mom, can I paint my nails? I would say like, oh, let's have a conversation about that, because you could do that and that doesn't make you gay. But some people might say that to you and you're going to wonder what that means. But there's also like stereotypes exist for a reason. Am I allowed to say that? That might get me in trouble. But I think I especially wrestle with this because my story is so different in that I'm not a celibate gay Christian, right? Like, I got married. I'm married to a man. I'm straight passing. So I've always had this perception that if you choose to surrender your temptations to the Lord, that these other things kind of fade away. And when I walked into this conference, it was like, I was like, this is a group of beautiful gay men, like meticulously groomed, dressed immaculately. Like you're like, those are gay people.
It's a stereotype that the gays appreciate.
Yes.
they dress well. Yeah.
They smell good.
Yeah.
They sing wonderfully. Like, just all the things.
Stereotypes exist for a reason, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're just like worshiping.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I've ever seen that and gone, oh, my friends who are gay, who don't know Jesus, have been sold this lie that I've also believed, that to follow Jesus is giving up so much of this, when really it's surrendering your sexuality. And it doesn't mean, like, I just had this idea that you slowly become straighter and straighter and straighter looking. And that wasn't the case. It was like the first time ever that I was like, I could invite my gay friends here
Interesting.
to hear the gospel. and they would be comfortable here. Something else that was really interesting to me was before the conference started, they were talking about some safety measures that they were taking. And so if you were comfortable being in their media, you would wear a one color lanyard. But if you didn't want pictures or videos of yourself in their media, you would wear a different color lanyard. And in my brain, I'm going like, man, that's super PC. Like, you just got to come out, like, and be honest with your story. And then I got there and I realized there were a group of people, some who had fully transitioned, some partially transitioned, some people not transitioned, but who were there, who were wearing the safety lanyards because Christians look at them and know that they're trans and they don't feel safe in a church. But then their trans community looks at them and doesn't want them to enter into a building of faith. And this conference, because it had those safety lanyards, that was the first time for some of them to be worshiping with other believers for the first time in years. And we can have differing opinions. I think I have some pretty conservative opinions when it comes to transitioning in conversations like that. But to think about the fact that there was a community of believers that hold to the Bible as their final authority, that was willing to make room for people in transition to come and ask their questions to people of faith, seems really significant to me. It was a 3-day conference, and I don't know that there was a single session I was in that I wasn't sobbing. Because when I was thinking about it, I was like, this, all of our churches should look like this.
Interesting. So let me ask you a couple clarifying questions.
Yeah.
So from your paradigm, and could you bring the microphone just a tad bit closer to you? From your paradigm, you, and we discussed this a bit, personally don't use the language of gay Christian, even though you have dealt with same-sex attraction and you're now in a heterosexual marriage. But you are okay with fellowshipping and attending conferences of folks who do use said labels.
Yeah.
And then in that, you have this concern. Now, was the concern of like, hey, like, there's a bunch of folks here dealing with the same thing and we're all at the same hotel. Is this wise? Do you feel like that was homophobic? Like, do you feel like that thought was homophobic? Or do you think that, because I'm not fully aware if you're saying that thought was homophobic or other aspects.
I'm saying that thought for me was a thought, is a conviction for me. So I'm like, I will not be in a support group with other same-sex attracted women because I don't want to put myself in that position.
Yeah, that sounds like wisdom on your part.
And then I would also say, are we aware that that should be a question that we entertain? Not necessarily like, hey, shouldn't we all not stay in the same hotel? But do we recognize that these questions of conviction need to be asked?
Got it. Okay. And then with regard, so because I think that the idea of homophobia is an interesting one, right? And I'm going to talk. You push back if you want to. Okay. And I've said this before. So my wife, we've been together for 20 years, married 16. For whatever reason, she has a thing with animals, and whenever she's around animals, she freaks out, but specifically dogs. I've seen her jump on cars. I've seen her jump on living room couches. I've seen her jump on dining room tables. I'm talking if there's a dog. We don't know why. There was no bite when she was a kid. We don't know why. To me, when I think the word phobia, like that's a phobia of animals to me, right? And so when the word phobia gets kind of thrown around, you're fat phobic, you're homophobic, you're transphobic. I'm like, aren't we kind of weaponizing language to make someone something for not affirming said thing?
Yes.
Right. And so when you said like, so I'm trying to get clarity on what does that look like for you? Because we had the conversation last night. Actually, my brother and sister came over yesterday. They're a little younger than me. They're 31. I'm 39. And my 3-year-old was painting my sister's fingernails. And somehow the conversation of boys painting their fingernails came up. And I was like, yeah, no, we don't do that here. And they were like, oh, okay. And then someone was like, well, some boys get their nails painted. And we were like, yeah, we don't do that here. We as boys don't get our fingernails painted here. And then someone, I think my wife was like, well, yeah, like, but there's some, you can get, what is it, like the clear. And I was like, okay, that's different. You know, if you want to, Levi, who's 9, my 9-year-old, if you want to go get a manicure, we can go get a manicure together, and like that'll probably help you stop biting your nails. But when it comes to this, we don't do this as men in this house because maybe it's me and my conspiracy theory brain, but I do feel like there's an intentional desire to try and feminize men. Right, consistently, right? And so whether that's their temperament, whether that's women, sometimes, not all the time, confusing competence with tyranny, right? And you're thinking a man is competent, therefore he wants to be a tyrannical man that's perpetuating the patriarchy and everything's bad. And so it's like, no. We're not going to do that. This is why we're not going to do that. And we think, and I believe that sometimes there's this intentional effort, sometimes, not all the time, to try and make men soft and docile. And here, we do push-ups and pull-ups every day. We work out, we protect, we work hard, we earn, we love our women, we love our sisters and our wives, right? And so I don't see that as homophobic. Like, I see that as, no, that's just a hard line for us. We're not going to do that. Now, my friends that come around, who are like artists and rappers, and that's like real trendy now. Like, I don't roast them for it. I don't make fun of them. I don't tease them about it. I don't even think about it, right? It's never crossed my mind of like, you're gay because you got your finger. Like, it's just, But I do know how some people would see that and be like, you're not allowing your 9-year-old to paint his fingernails is homophobic. And I'm just like, no, it's not, because he needs to understand what a masculine man is. And that to me is just one expression that can be used as a way to like soften boys instead of allowing them to be masculine in who they are. What do you think about that? I know I just said a whole lot.
I guess my question is, what inherently about painting your nails makes you soft? Is it that it is typically historically tied to women?
Yeah. Same thing that wearing a dress makes you soft, right? Now, obviously, there's always the exception to the rule. There's kilts, right, that look like dresses, but they're not dresses. But I'm not letting my boy wear a dress, right? And I'm not letting him wear a kilt, because he's not Scottish, right? So that would be the thing, is like, if this is something that historically women do, and we're not going to do that, you know?
Yeah, I think there is a point in saying, how does our culture digest this, right? And so I would land differently with you in that my husband and I would probably allow our boys to paint their nails, but we would have the conversation with saying, okay, what does this mean in our culture? And is this how you're expressing it? Because when I was growing up, it was Focus on the Family would give the advice, don't let your boys paint their nails. Don't let your girls wear boys' clothes. It means they're gay. It was so important. I wore boys' clothes. Like,
what is boys' clothes?
Well, I wore boys' clothes the last time I was on your show.
But I think, don't you think there's a difference between a girl wearing a hoodie and a boy wearing a blouse? Like, unless they're Prince, like, and if you're Prince, you can do whatever you want. I don't care if you're Prince.
You can do whatever
you're the coolest dude on the
sure.
earth. You can wear heels, right? Because he's like, it's Prince.
Yeah,
it's Michael, right? A little different. But I think there's a big difference between a boy wearing a blouse you know, like even a scoop neck to me looks a little weird with the tummy out, you know, it's like some of the workout stuff, a crop top. I'm just kind of like, what are we doing, guys? You know? So I think there's a difference.
Yes.
I'm being facetious.
That's fair.
Yeah.
No.
I think there's a difference.
That is fair.
I think you wearing a hoodie, or I don't remember what you had on last time. You wearing a hoodie, a sweater. Yeah. I didn't think that. I didn't think,
yes.
oh, she's wearing boys' clothes.
It is much different for girls to wear boys' clothes than it is for boys to wear girls' clothes. Mm-hmm. So I would say in our culture, there are real implications of, again, stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. So I think the things I'm thinking through are like in my relationship with my husband, like I'm physically bigger than my husband.
Mm-hmm. Like you're taller.
I'm taller.
Mm-hmm.
I'm heavier than my husband.
Mm-hmm.
I work out.
Mm-hmm.
My husband doesn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are some differences that our boys see in their day-to-day lives that's their norm. My 5-year-old was telling people at the zoo the other day, you can tell which one's the female because the female is larger. And I was like, no, okay, that's smart.
That's hilarious.
And that's true in our context. It's not typically true in most contexts. Sure. So I think I think you have to weigh both. Yeah. I can't prescriptively answer.
Sure.
And I respect the way that you parent, and I think it's noble, but I don't think that's the conviction that I hold.
Yeah.
But again, the conviction that I hold would have a conversation with my son saying, people are probably going to say this to you. Right. Do you know what it means? Right. And like, can we talk about that? So when I say homophobia, so this is my thing. I've been called homophobic before because I do not affirm a secular sexual ethic, mm-hmm. which is very interesting to me because I've never been called Islamophobic before, mm-hmm. which I would say when I say I'm a Christian, mm-hmm. that means I believe all other religions mm-hmm. are wrong.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they'll call you Islamophobic too. That's coming.
Oh, maybe they will in the comments here. Yeah, there we go. Please.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting, right? That we hold the line in some places very... So that's not what I mean.
Yeah.
I think I mean, I know I mean going, oh, I wanted you to I thought being a sold out Christian meant to assimilate and mm-hmm. look like this, when I'm actually coming to realize there are marks of the LGBTQ community's lives that are like threads mm-hmm. in a blanket that don't need to make up the blanket in a whole, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. But when someone, this is very abstract, but let's say like a Mexican blanket is still a blanket, mm-hmm. but there's like a mark mm-hmm. there. Mm-hmm. It's a familiar look. Mm-hmm. That speaks to and tells a story of its origins. And so when I think of the Samaritan woman, I think of Jesus uniquely using her sinful identity, like an identity that was literally founded on the mark of sexual sin, mm-hmm. to witness back to that community. Mm-hmm. So I look at the LGBTQ plus community and I go, oh, it doesn't necessarily have to mean assimilating to what do straight people look like and do and mm-hmm. embody and act. Mm-hmm. When there's a lot of ways that God made people mm-hmm. that can signify certain things and that God can use to witness to a community that, you know, mm-hmm. a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community don't feel safe around.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think my other question for you, and I want to hear more about this conference, is you mentioned gay men, mm-hmm. and then you mentioned, fashion sense and smell good and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that there's something to women? Like, is it more likely for a woman to be same-sex attracted and then end up in a heterosexual marriage, in a relationship? And is there something to that? versus a man who's like, no, man, I like men, and like this is it, like I'm celibate, like it's a wrap. And then that changing. I know we could look at anecdotal examples of both, right? Men who say they're same-sex attracted and they end up being with a woman, those exist. But I feel like anecdotally, and this is very anecdotally, there's way more women that at some point were like, I'm only interested in women that then end up in a relationship, in a marriage with a man. Is there anything to that?
I don't know. My two thoughts would be, first, is it maybe more likely that women are more ready to publicly share that is their story?
Okay.
Do we have more testimony of that because
that's
women are more willing to share because
maybe
we're
naturally more vulnerable?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Because at this conference, at lunchtime, they had different affinity groups, and there was a mixed orientation marriage affinity group.
Okay.
And so that was one or both spouses have same-sex attracted, but are obviously married to the opposite gender. And I was super interested in this because my husband and I think we have a YouTube video that's like mixed orientation marriage. We very rarely use that term because we're like, we're married. But that describes our marriage. And so we were like, let's go. Like, I didn't know there were other people like us. This group was huge. And
How many people total were at this conference? Are we talking hundreds or thousands?
No, hundreds, maybe close to 600
Okay,
people.
that's a pretty big size conference.
Yeah, it was good. There were people in this mixed orientation marriage group there was at least 3 couples that had been married for 30 years or more.
Interesting.
That was wild to me. As someone who gets comments and DMs consistently saying your marriage is doomed to fail.
Jeez.
To sit in a circle with other Christians who have been married for so long and have been faithful in their marriage was so deeply encouraging. Now, the thing about that circle of people is the majority of those couples, the guy was same-sex attracted and the girl was straight. So that says the opposite. So that was interesting to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Is it one of those, he was same-sex attracted, married, and then later on in life came out? Or did he always
these are
know?
people with all different stories. There's people...
From the stories you heard?
Yes.
So folks already married, and then they're like, I think I've always felt this way.
Yes.
And then they kind of have like a support group. Interesting. Okay. Okay. What else? Tell me more about this conference. Okay. Well, tell me more about this conference. And then was there any stuff that you found concerning or alarming?
We gotta edit this. Long pause. Because I'm trying to earnestly think. I need to be fair in my critique. Sorry. My brain goes to like, if we can edit this part out. I'm like, there was stuff with like the conference that I'm like, you're not running on time. And like, this is very gay typical, dramatic.
Are the gays always late?
Not gay people. I think it was like there was like
you just said gay typical. I've never heard that phrasing
before. No, I can't think of anything concerning.
Okay. So all in all, you had a good experience.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you had a good experience. You saw the value of the community they're cultivating, though it sounds like you share some different presuppositions about some of the terminology being used and maybe even some different conclusions, specifically, if I'm tracking correctly, I definitely would, about people who are trans, continuing to identify as trans and potentially leading lives where they're opposite gender. Yeah. Is that fair that would be some of the areas you disagree with? Yeah,
I was kind of thinking through, I got asked the other day, do you identify as side B? And I think for a really long time, I'd be like, of course I do. And now I'm starting to think, you know, in the book of James, is where he says temptation gives birth to, and then there's the list, and it leads to death. And so I think there is a common misconception that a lot of side B people are okay with the temptation that they have. I can't speak for all side B people. So I'm going, oh, well, if that's the truth of side B, then I can't stand with them in that. Because I think James makes it abundantly clear that we have to put it to death. Now, where I don't stand with side Y or side Y would be, I believe that I can fully step into leadership, especially within Christian circles, as long as I am working to put my temptation to death. Even if my temptation continues to persist and exist in my entire living in the now and the not yet. And part of my argument with that is, why would we ever be given self-control as a fruit of the Spirit if temptation was always meant to be eliminated for every Christian who is walking in the fullness of Christ?
That's a good point. Yeah. I think so. I kind of went into the weeds on this with a couple different friends and had this conversation. And I would more or less, I don't think those labels are helpful, you know. But in the same way, I don't think someone calling themselves an alcoholic or an addict is helpful. I don't think saying that, labeling yourself as that, and not in a weird spooky dooky new agey, oh, you're speaking this over yourself, not in that sense, just in a very practical sense. I'm not going to identify with being an addict or an alcoholic or whatever, right? Fill in the blank. And then at the same token, I have went and spoke at men's groups or what is it called, rehabilitation centers that follow the steps and use that sort of language, right? So I wouldn't not fellowship with those folks or disagree, or oh, you guys mark and avoid in that. So it sounds like we kind of landed very similar places with that. And as I went down this rabbit hole, there's the idea of the difference between disordered desires, that's the language that's kind of used from the Side X community, versus attraction. And then now you got to really pinpoint what you mean by these things, right? Because are we saying same-sex attraction is same-sex lust? Or are we saying in someone's natural state, they're going to have the propensity to find this person more attractive, not in a derogatory sense, but in a, hey, this is what this is what I naturally look at, and I don't have to go and look a second and third time and fantasize and create all these things, but this is where I'm naturally at, right? And so I had to really get in and then now we're having really technical conversations about definitions of words, right? And then I go, man, how much of this is even worth talking? How much is it really worth talking about? Because I'm with you in that, I don't think we should identify with our temptation, right? I think that's beyond reasonable. At the same time, I think, why would I not fellowship with and have a relationship with people who I disagree with on their language, right? Because what I don't think is the alcoholic or the addict or the same-sex attracted person is saying that my desire in this is good. I don't think they're saying that. I think they're saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're saying is, this is what it is for me, and I'm willing to submit this and crucify this and keep going, right? I think that's what I hear, right? But some people hear other things. Some people hear a celebration of said sin. Some people, right? And I don't know how much of that is them hearing what they want to hear versus they're actually being precedent said, odd things said, weird theologies, right? I don't know. And then you go into well, now if I have a conversation with someone that is loosely affiliated with Side B, now I have to be responsible for every single thing that this person in any conference they've ever spoken, ever said. And that's just unrealistic. And now we get into the bandwagon fallacy, guilty by association fallacy, right? And I think that's unfair. But would you say that that's a proper assessment from my standpoint? I've had a very limited range of interactions. Just at Exiles in Babylon. That was my limited range of interactions. And I felt like I heard the same thing from everyone. And I had a really good application that I've been able to apply, which is I need to spend more time with the single people in my life. Like that's what I walked away with, and that's what I've been doing, and that's been really fruitful and helpful and healthy. But yeah, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, we were preaching through, our church was preaching through Philippians, and we got to Philippians 3, and they're talking about the Judaizers and this pressure from this group of people who believed in the life and resurrection of Jesus, but they had previously been Jewish, and they were going around, I think they were like tailcoating, I could be wrong on this, but tailcoating Paul, his churches, and they were going to these groups of Christians, specifically like Gentiles, and saying to them, great, you love Jesus, but actually you haven't been circumcised, and you have to be. And they were creating this fear and this legalism. And to me, when I look at you're not truly surrendered to Christ unless you only use freedom identity, I'm going, I think that's us being Judaizers. I think that's us trying. So when you say it's not my conviction, but I can fellowship with people, that's where I would land, is saying like, where can we fellowship? I think it was Edmund Wickham at Exiles in Babylon who had that super helpful chart of like inner circle beliefs that get more broad, and there are things that we have to agree on, right? Like they're orthodoxy. There are things we have to agree on. And then there are secondary issues and tertiary issues that we can still be united in and disagree over those other issues over, and go, yeah, you and I are both going to be in heaven together. We worship the same God. I think Francis Chan said something about, I can unify with people unless it's over the issue of sin. And when I heard him say that, I was like, I think he's talking about sexuality. Like, I think he's probably referencing the progressive church movement, and that it's like, no, if it's clearly outlined, but we don't have clear outlines. Again, my argument would go back to the use of the term Gentile. If you do like a really good study on the use of the term Gentile, it's actually an offensive term. We see it used all throughout the New Testament. Samaritan woman. Like, those things are really, really interesting to me. So they would be arguments to say, not to say like everyone has to have the same conviction, but to say, if you're gonna make this a legalistic matter, I don't see that as the heart of Christ in this.
Yeah, because you're kind of creating an additional barrier towards orthodoxy, even though in a perfect world, I would hope that they would eventually land in a position, like say someone comes to Christ and they're like, hey, I'm trans and identify with opposite gender, but I'm going to be celibate. I would hope that they would eventually land in the gender that they were born into, but I wouldn't tell that person like they can't come to church, right? Yeah. or they can't be my friend, or like we can't be fellowship. So I think I'm totally tracking with you in that regard, and I think that the deeper conversation is, I call them the cringe fringe. I think there's a cringe fringe on both sides.
Yes. Right?
Like there's the cringe fringe that go all the way progressive, or like right there teetering the line, and I'm like, what are we talking about? This is off the wall stuff, right? And where God is sexuality, and you have to fully affirm, or you have to get really close to tipping over into affirmation. And then the other end of the cringe fringe is the, hey, any acknowledgement of what you're wrestling with, we're casting you out, we're marking, avoiding you. And if you even acknowledge that other people may have this, but you have a different conviction, we're marking, avoiding you. And that's where I go, wow, so it's like there's like fundamentalists on both sides of this conversation. And those are often the folks that have the loudest voices.
Yeah.
You know, those are the folks that have the loudest voices. As you've been navigating these spaces, do you feel like the dialogue is progressing or regressing?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's progressing. I see a real desire. I think for so long, there was kind of even just this belief that being trans was like a choice. And now I see the church empathetically going, oh, gender dysphoria is real.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are like me, cisgendered, going, I have no idea what that's like, but I'm so sorry that that is your reality, because I can't I mean, being, so again, I'm bipolar. So there are days when my emotional reality does not fit with my actual reality. And when I think about that and I think about people with gender dysphoria, I go, oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And the tough part is, so did you keep it with the whole like Olympic controversy, boxer thing? So we took what I think is a minority position in our circles. And we were like, hey, this person is, from all measurable accounts, is intersex, but has been female their whole life. That is not the same as Riley Gaines and Leah Thomas.
Yeah. That's
not the same thing. And if we're going to make it the same thing, like, that's sloppy on conservative evangelicals. We shouldn't do that. That's not good. That's not the same thing. That's not what's happening here. This person's from a very conservative Muslim country where this stuff is outlawed. That's not what's happening here. In that, I got a lot of backlash. It's still XY chromosome, all that kind of stuff. Like, okay, fair enough. Like, that's a different conversation, though. Should someone with an XY chromosome compete with someone with an XX chromosome, and in what sports, and different conversation. I then got a direct message from a girl who is actually from the Pacific Northwest, who plays basketball and is technically XY chromosome. Christian, goes to church, loves Jesus, and was like, hey, the way you covered this was so awesome. And I want to share my story, but I'm afraid because it might put my high school basketball career at jeopardy if people knew this about me. I've always had female genitalia. I've always been a girl. But if I didn't have Jesus, I don't know, I may be a lesbian. I don't know. But this is where I'm at. And like, really appreciated the way we talked about it. And like, let's not conflate this. This is not good. This is not, this is not helpful. Right. And I think that's where, you know, because even the word empathy, right? Like, but that word can be weaponized as well. Right. But that's where hey, there's people really dealing with stuff that we just don't understand, right? And someone that's intersex, like that's not the same thing. Someone who's dealing with gender dysphoria, that's not the same thing. Someone that's dealing with bipolar, that's not, like, we all have different crosses to bear, and the less we act like everyone's the same and it's like blank slate, I think the more we'll actually get to healthy fellowship in humanity. With humanity, instead of just like labeling people out. You're in the out group. We're the in group. You're the out group. And I'm just like, that's not how my world has always worked. And so I think what you're saying is spot on. Like, someone that has schizophrenia, someone that has bipolar, someone that is neurotypical, like, they're just different things. They're different. They're categorically different things. And Christians need to have a broader spectrum in terms of how to engage these things.
Yes. It's funny, I hear you say that, and I just think of The Chosen and the way they depict the different disciples and how different.
And they catch a lot of backlash for a lot of things.
Yes.
You know? Yeah.
And it's just, we are so quick to forget about people not being raised the same way we were, or to not have the same understanding of scripture that we have, or to even just assume that everything we've ever been taught is totally correct, right? There's no such thing as perfect theology.
Well, unless you're Catholic and Orthodox, then they believe they have perfect theology.
Sorry, guys.
I mean, that's kind of like that. Yeah. It kind of goes along with their whole, dogmas thing and stuff.
Sorry.
No shots. That's no shot. I'm saying they believe they have perfect theology because all this has been sorted out for them. That's not a knock on Catholic.
Right.
I love my Catholic folks.
They don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where's the camera? They don't. But you can think that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Pray for you, with you.
Yeah. I think a great segue to a persistent distrust of institutions, and specifically the institution of church. So we're already people are already freaking out because of something as simple as like gender affirming care on children. And what does that mean? And how can you do that? Someone can not be allowed to drink, not be allowed to drive a car, not be allowed to get a tattoo, but by golly, they can get care that can completely transform their body in a permanent state. And there's a lot of people that are like, and this is the medical consensus? This is the institutional consensus? Like, no, thank you. Like, I don't want anything to do with your institutional consensus. And I think some of this stuff that we've seen in our institutions recently, do you think some of that bleeds over to the skepticism that people have towards church as an institution? All right, guys, we're going to go over to the Patreon exclusive segment of this conversation that's maybe a little too spicy for YouTube. So here's a little preview over that. So if you want to see the full extended version of this conversation, as well as all of our future conversations, have access to the chat, be able to ask our guests questions, you could sign up for a free 7-day trial. Patreon. The link is in the description and the pinned comment below. Here's a little preview of this conversation. All right? I'll see you over on Patreon. Peace.
When someone says, I've gone through church hurt, or specifically pastoral hurt, and so I distrust the church, on one hand, I went to Mars Hill for 4 years. I listened to the rise and fall of Mars Hill, and the thing that stuck out to me most specifically was that Mark is one of the most gifted teachers I've ever heard.
He's phenomenal.
He's a gifted teacher. Do I think he's wise? That's why you think I don't go to church every week, because I'm a millennial and I have kids. That's terrible.
Yeah.
There have been so many times when I have wondered why the Lord would allow me to suffer in the ways that I have.
Ruslan.
And he called his 10 servants and delivered to them 10 pounds and said unto them, Occupy till I come. The Occupy Till I Come collection is here at the Blessed God Shop, a collaboration we did with our friend Josh Nadeau from Sword and Pencil. This piece of art is made up of beautiful iconography, telling the story of sowing and reaping, dying to sin, and evangelizing the lost. In this collection, you will find these designs highlighted, such as this Death to Sin t-shirt, which highlights the bold design of hammering a nail through Satan's skull. And on the back, a large print that says discipline is freedom. Now you can find all the regular stuff like high quality printed shirts and Champs printed hoodies, but this time around we also decided to do some women's cut t-shirts as well. And for the first time ever, you can also pick up a beautiful canvas print of the Occupy Till I Come design or the Discipline is Freedom piece. And we also, for the first time ever, got an amazing 500-piece puzzle, which I personally enjoyed getting to sit down, do with my own family, and it sparked some really interesting conversations. And when you put on one of the pieces from this collection, it's a constant reminder that we are here to not just sit back and be apathetic, but to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to help usher in God's kingdom on this side of eternity and to care for the least of these. But this entire collection is only available until September 8th at midnight. So go to blessgod.shop and get yours now.